will drift in. Okay, it gives me truly a great pleasure to introduce our speaker, who comes to us here from Santa Barbara, California. This is Ellie Noam here from New York, and I'm very pleased to offer this session of the webinar of the jointly by the International Media Management Academic Association, IMMAA, and the Columbia Institute for Teleinformation, CITI. And so we're going to talk today, our speaker today is John Sargent, who is a truly great publisher in a great industry, going back to Gutenberg, and if you think about it, even before, when the monks were publishing, were copying books. And he's also a great guy. And he's published thousands of people. And recently, he's also published a book about himself, finding himself now on the other side of the desk, so to speak, as an author. It's a kind of a memoir, and I read it. It's a really interesting book, great book, and I recommend it. He's recalling there his family. He's a fourth generation publishing royalty. His great-grandfather was the Effendi, the founder of Doubleday, the company, the noted publisher. In his book, he recalls his childhood in New York and in Wyoming, and later in New York again. I must say, as a professor, he's much less recalling his higher education experience. It does not really rate much. Stanford gets one sentence, I think, about going to college in California. No detail. Yeah. Okay. The Columbia Business School, right here, my institution, gets a few more sentences, but only because he's meeting his wife there, and he's sharing a subway ride with her. So this is basically what the Columbia experience was. In fairness, however, I will say he did return to Columbia, spoke twice to my class some years ago. Thank you, John. But the minor delay of spending time in academia has not stopped him from being a force in the world of ideas, being instrumental in many publishing activities and leadership roles. There are too many to list here, but his most recent significant roles were as CEO of Macmillan Publishers. And I should add that Macmillan owns, it's kind of a complicated structure, but basically there's the European part and the London-based, and there's a Swiss-based and a German-based and an American-based. Anyway, they published my own 2 textbooks. Now I'm getting to ebooks, topic today. I held out for those 2 textbooks for a contract that gave me royalties for the ebook version. Instead of what the standard contract that Palgrave offered to its authors, which was the princely sum of $750 for the ebook. No royalties, so in other words, makes no difference if you sold 1 or sold 1 million, $750 you got. But I held out, since the books were about media management. I kind of knew a little bit about the subject. And eventually they gave me royalties, and much to their surprise, and mine too, the ebook versions were downloaded one year 1.9 million times, and the other book 1.8 million times. So they owed me actually real money, which publishers really hate to do. They don't like to pay royalties to authors. They kind of think deep down that they're really doing authors a favor by publishing them. So this almost ended up in court, and it was settled. This was after John was gone from the company, I should add. Macmillan is owned by the Holzbrink family of Germany. John became one of the leadership of that very big company and its executive committee. But all this came to an end when, during COVID, as a cost-cutting measure, Holspring wanted to seriously cut down on staffing, letting people go. John resisted, so they had a parting of the ways. Beyond my own little personal story about ebooks and Macmillan, John has a mega story and a mega role in the economics of e-publishing. That was his very public fights with Amazon and then Apple over the pricing models that publishers would receive from the distributors, these ebook retailers, Amazon and Apple. He did this in behalf of the publishers. Not all of them were very enthusiastic, but he really held the fort and raised the flag, and he will tell us about that. So we all know that e-publishing is really important, but some of the questions are: has it become as excuse me? Let me jump back. There are several aspects to e-publishing, e-book business. One of them is the retailing, what Amazon does, say, of regular physical books. The other one is the publishing of books without paper, without print, in an e-version. And those are two somewhat overlapping but really different stories. And a third element is the presence of the e in the editorial process, in the distribution process, in the marketing process, etc., which is now increased through the emergence of AI, and he'll tell us about that also. But the question is really kind of 10, 20 years ago, people thought that the E part would do to books what in a way what it did to music, to the music business, which was also in an extraordinary decline. But in a way, just as music has revived as a business, the question really is whether the E in e-publishing really has shaped and reshaped the publishing industry as much as we had expected to. Because still a kind of a very, very large share, I think it's more than 80% of the revenue still comes from regular print books, and thus 20% share of the E part has remained fairly stable, and even that is divided 10% and 10% by audio type books and the actual e-books, the ones that you can read on the screen. And so 10% does not sound revolutionary. And it's not even if my observation is correct, not even a generational issue, because according to the numbers that I've seen, young people and observations, young people actually like to have physical books. And surprise, surprise, it's the older generation that flock to e-versions of books. Why? Because they can enlarge the print and they don't have to go to the store. They can get the books home, et cetera, et cetera. So it's not something that is likely to change as somehow the readers of print books age out and disappear from the scene. And so these are kind of really interesting issues of what happened and what did not happen. And we look forward to hearing much more than that from John. Thank you for joining us, John, and please go ahead and talk to us.
Okay. Thank you. So in thinking about what to talk about today, occurred to me that you guys are in different countries, you face different issues, different markets. I've been out of the book business for 3 years now, so I'm not deeply involved in current issues. I can't give you percentages of ebooks and audiobooks versus physical books. So instead, I thought it might be good to talk together about a framework about how to make the decisions that are upcoming and will continue to come up about the digital transformation, and how do you when the business shifts, how do you make the decisions? What do you look at? How do you make the decisions to make good decisions for authors and publishers going forward? So I went through 5 major shifts in publishing over 40 years in the business. First was the development of chain bookstores and big box book selling. Second was the development of online bookselling. Third was the development of audio books. Fourth, the development of digital books. And finally, the expansion of copyright issues in the new digital era. Oddly enough, the lessons learned in each instance were oddly cumulative. In other words, they were all similar and they all stacked one on top of another. So for today, I thought I'd narrow down and talk about the difficulties brought on by online bookselling and the issues surrounding the digital transformation in publishing. I'll try to explain all that by just telling two stories. One is an Amazon story and the other is a story about Google. And you'll see as I tell the stories that there are some common themes in them. And please bear with me, the main point sort of, I'll sum up what the framework of how to make the decisions is at the end, after plowing through the stories. And if you have questions, we'll have some time at the end for questions and a discussion. But for me, the discussion is the valuable part here. So please feel free to interrupt at any time. Ellie, I think will be sort of the moderator here. Please feel free to interrupt at any time if you want to hear more or have any questions about what I'm trying to get across. So first, the story of Amazon. An Amazon story. I met Jeff Bezos when Amazon was a few guys wearing baseball caps working in a Seattle garage. He'd made a rational decision that books were the single best instance for internet retailing, right? You have millions of products, way too broad a selection for a bookstore, a bricks and mortar bookstore. And you had a huge amount of niche audiences, right? There were lots and lots of niche audiences. He was right about that, as he almost always was about everything. So Jeff had a business plan, what he wanted to do. I met him in a hotel in Washington, D.C., where he presented the Amazon business plan in a hotel room, not in a conference room, had 2 beds on it. The business plan was on one bed. He stood between the beds, and he asked if we would give him all our books on standard terms. Which we agreed to do, as all publishers agreed to do. So we sold him books at the same term we sold normal bookstores. What happened next is Jeff decided to drop the price of physical books, and he dropped it dramatically. Right, so he dropped it in the end down to 50% off, which was the exact price that we were selling him the books for. Right, so I met with Jeff every year. We would spend an hour talking about Amazon's expansion plans. And one year when he dropped those prices so dramatically, we met at BEA. And I asked him, I said, so look, we're selling you a book for we're selling you a $20 book for $10. You're selling it for $9.99. How can you keep up? You know, how long are you going to keep doing that? And he said, well, forever. I said, what the hell do you mean? You're investing in infrastructure, warehousing, tons of technology. How can you possibly sell the books at cost and have that work for more than a short period of time? And he laughed and he said, trust me, we can do it forever. And what I didn't realize then, and what publishers didn't realize, is Jeff was using books as a loss leader to develop an audience, and he was going to be a lot more than a bookstore over time. But we didn't see it. What we did see was the $9.95 price point, or the in that case $12.99 price point, was going to, in the end of the day, put bookstores out of business. So we fought hard with Jeff to try to force him to raise the price, and various pressures came to bear, and he did. A bunch of physical bookstores went out of business, but not as many as we had feared. We still got paid the same amount, and the authors and agents got paid the same amount. So when he was selling these books at a deep discount, none of us suffered financially. Authors, agents, publishers didn't, but booksellers did, right? Because bookstores operate on thin margins. And as he took more and more market share, it made it more and more difficult for them to stay open. Over this period of time, while this was going on, the books had started to develop digitally. In 1995, I worked at Dorland Kindersley. We were 20% owned by Microsoft. Family reference publishings and CD-ROM, the CD-ROM format was a natural fit. So books started to become developed electronically first on CD-ROMs. It was hugely expensive development work. I remember sitting around a conference room and we were dreaming and plotting for the day that a CD-ROM could take 1 gigabyte of information in storage. 1 gigabyte was like the holy grail we never thought we would reach. As that business developed, the price points were very high. Microsoft had developed the #1 product in the market, the Encarta Encyclopedia. It sold for $249. The CD-ROM business was growing and prosperous across the United States and the English-speaking world. And then it fell apart, and it fell apart on a single day. It fell apart on the day Microsoft dropped the price of the Encarta dictionary from $249 to under $100 in a single day. From that point on, the CD-ROM market was not viable, period. But a seed had been planted, right? The next thing up was ebooks, and ebooks, rather than enhanced books, were just plain text with a few added bells and whistles, a few features added to it. And Amazon, of course, jumped immediately into the market, as we all know now, with the Kindle. And Jeff would come to New York with Steve Kessel, who was in charge of Kindle, and they would talk to us about the Kindle. They would show us the Kindle, and they wanted us to sell them ebook terms on the same terms as printed books, right? They wanted us to sell it as a percentage discount from a price that we set. And we figured there was going to be a lot of money in it. We didn't have to print the books. We figured the authors would prosper. It would take a lot of cost out of the business. And, at the end of the day, who really did want to read? We didn't think it was going to be a big market. Who wanted to read on these clunky-ass devices, something that the book was a much better technology? So we went forward and we said, we'll do business with you. We signed agreements. And then without telling the publishers, at a press conference, Jeff got up on stage and said he would sell the entire New York Times bestseller list for $9.99 a copy. And in those days, the price point on a hardcover was $24.99 in most stores. Some retail bookstores discounted up to 20 to 30%. So you see, he was going to undercut the market by pricing it incredibly and aggressively low. When he did that, we were deeply, deeply alarmed. The business, he went on Oprah Winfrey. Oprah held up the Kindle and said, everybody should buy one. You should buy your books on this. The business took off very fast. They had 85 to 95% market share in the early days. And what we feared was what had happened to music, and it had just happened. And in music, I don't know if you all remember it, but in music, it went digital. And the next year, all the music stores in America went out of business. Big chains, independents, you couldn't find a music store. And we feared the same thing would happen to bookstores. And while music, it became immediately digital across the board, it was pretty clear that a large part of the book reading audience wanted to continue to read in physical books. But we were going to be faced with an environment where there would be no bookstores in business with which to sell them because, again, the thin margins in bookselling. So we had this very real fear that what happened in music would happen in bookstores, and bookstores started going out of business. So publishers all realized that we needed a competitor for Amazon, and ideally we would need to control the price. It was pretty obvious, at least to me. And then here came Apple with the creation of the iPod, the agency model where publishers control the price, and the crisis of, the business going away within weeks passed. It cost a hell of a lot of money. There was a Department of Justice lawsuit. There was the staggering amount of work and effort that went into figuring out how to manage through the crisis. But in the end of the day, physical bookstores did indeed survive and thrive, and authors did indeed make more money, not less money. So the crisis was averted. The next major threat, the second story, came in 2004, and it came from Google. Google had this grand plan. They were going to scan and digitize every book ever written in any language and make it available for free everywhere on Earth. Publishers with their concern for authors, didn't like that free everywhere on Earth very much. So we knew there was going to be a problem. And we started to have discussions with Google. They had come forth and done deals with the major libraries, many of the biggest libraries on Earth, to scan the entire collections of each of those libraries. And they were well along the way of collecting all the books available in the English language in any form, anywhere. They were well on the way in collecting all that information. The publishers immediately expressed their dismay. Negotiations started through the AAP, and immediately those negotiations got into deep trouble. Google went ahead and proceeded, and the publishers through the AAP and the publishers individually decided to sue Google, and we decided to sue Google along with the Authors Guild in order to stop the process and not allow them to scan the books. What happened immediately thereafter is settlement discussions of the lawsuit began. Richard Sarnoff and I drew the short straws and were the lead negotiators for the publishers. It took 8 years, negotiation between authors, publishers, and Google, to reach a final settlement agreement. The final agreement was over 300 pages in length, and parts of it were still being renegotiated up to a few years ago. In making the settlement, it covered books in various categories, right? The first category was books that were out of copyright, and that was easy. Google could legally make and distribute copies to libraries or the public at any price they liked, including free. Likewise, in copyright books that were currently available for sale were fairly easy. Google would need publisher and author permission to scan and give copies back to the libraries, or to give away copies, or even to make snippets. The majority of the 300-page agreement covered the vast amount of books in between. And that means books that are under copyright, but they are not currently being sold, or they are out of print, or they are in print, and in many cases, publishers and authors even didn't know whether books were out of print or still in print. If you imagine all the estates, all of that stuff, and in many cases didn't know if the books were in copyright or out of copyright. The heart of it was a copyright question, right? Is it a fair use of the books, of the copyright, to scan it in its entirety in order to somehow make money off of it, even if making money was not a concern and there wasn't a business model. So there it was. It was a big agreement, but there was a clause buried in that agreement in the middle of the 300 pages. And the story of that clause is interesting. I would imagine there are very few publishers on earth who know that that clause exists. It's an obtuse sort of clause. Google, in the negotiations, wanted to use the scans they had made of all those books for something called non-consumptive research. So Richard and I spent, I don't know, months and months of time trying to understand what is non-consumptive research. Google was pretty clear. Non-consumptive research is using this huge database of all these books to do scholarly work on them. And the case they gave us was, say a professor wants to understand the use of language. So you go all the way back in time and you determine swear words. What were the swear words? How many swear words were there in novels in the Victorian era? How many swear words are there in novels today? And when did swear words become more and more frequently used? And they said, take that as an example. Think of this huge corpus of text and how useful it will be for scholars to understand language. And we want to give scholars the right to use that. And by its definition, non-consumptive research. We're not going to use the books, right? We're not going to consume the actual words of the books to sell them. So it went back and forth. Richard and I couldn't figure it out. We came up with some ideas what they might be up to, couldn't figure all of it out. We gathered all the publishers together. We wrestled with it over 2 meetings, the AAP. We got textbook publishers, educational publishers, scholarly publishers, trade publishers. And we couldn't figure it out. So finally we okayed it. So buried in that agreement is Google has the right to use that entire corpus for non-consumptive research. So now all these years later, and this happened to us a fair amount with Google, all these years later, it's clear what Google could see and what we could not, right? Consider how valuable is the digital corpus of all the books from the major libraries of the world in all the languages as a source for large language models in artificial intelligence. It's of huge value. And the question is, will anyone get paid for it, given the clause that sits buried in that large agreement? Right? So those are my two stories. Looking back, I try to think what useful lessons do they give for the future, for future shifts in this industry and actually in other industries as well. And what could I offer you that might be useful as a way to look at it and a useful way to address changes that were coming in the future. So I came up with a framework of 6 questions to ask when the next shift comes, right? So this is basically, if you were sitting in the chair that I was sitting in, running one of the major publishing houses, and the next shift comes up that you have to tackle, what is the sort of checklist you should use to make sure you're thinking through all the issues you need to think through. So here you go, 6 questions. First question is, what is the effect of the shift on what I used to always call the publishing ecosystem? So that, broadly speaking, that's authors and agents is one component, publishers is another, bookstores or booksellers is the third, and the fourth is libraries, right? So there's that little ecosystem, and think through the effects of each change on each component separately of the ecosystem. Question number 2, what is the effect of price? Who gets paid? Who's in danger? And why are they in danger? Right? So price almost always is the defining disruptor, because in a capitalist system, the perceived value of the book in the eyes of the consumer. I got taught by the guy who put together the 1996 New York Mets, sorry, not the 1996, the year they won the World Series. He taught me, I had a plan then. I worked at Doubleday, so I worked as an analyst on the Mets, and we had an empty stadium at Shea Stadium in New York. The Mets were drawing 6,000 people. We had 52,000 seats. And I said to him, I said, look, why don't we give away tickets and we'll make the money on the concessions and the parking? And he said, once you give something away for free, you can never charge for it again. And so I always took that to heart. So at the end of the day, price is interesting in 2 ways. One, it determines what each of the parties in publishing gets for cash, which is important if you want authors to continue to be able to make a living, and if you want publishers and bookstores to exist. So, but price is equally important because it defines the future value of what will be paid in the future. So price is the key component. So think heavily about price and who has the pricing decision. Third question, what are the effects on copyright? How will the work of authors be protected? Fourth question, what are the effects on freedom of speech? Fifth question, what is the societal good? And you don't have to consider that one, and the pure profit motive would suggest you wouldn't. But to me, that was always the key, one of the key components. Is society better off at the end of the day, given whatever is, what your response to the next change is going to be? And the final question is, what is over the horizon that you cannot see? And I cannot emphasize enough, given the rate of change we see in the world today, nobody ever spent enough time on that. You know, we could have gotten research, we could have hired outside technologists, we could have done a whole bunch of research in each of these cases to see what might be over the horizon, and we didn't. So that's sort of the framework. And I'll end the sort of speech part with 3 things that are coming in the near future, which I'm pretty sure the industry will need to address. One is library ebook usage. Given how ebooks have transpired in the libraries, anyone can have multiple library cards. Anyone can get all their entire supply of books that they want to read for free if they know how to work the system, and it's an easy system to work. And the perceived value of the people who are reading all their books, ebooks, out of libraries for free, the perceived value is 0 now of reading their books. They don't pay for books anymore. Now, in the old days, there was friction in the library market, right? You had to get in the car, you had to go to the library, you had to find it, they have the book. Then you had to give it back in 2 weeks, and there were fines, and you lose the goddamn book, and then you'd have to go back to the library to give the book back in. It was a hassle. Today's world, it's as easy as going on Amazon and clicking the buy button and you read for free. So publishers, author, everyone's going to have to address that at some point. Number two is artificial intelligence in the creative process. Two types of artificial intelligence. One, sort of the business side of artificial intelligence, fine. For publishing, for the intellectual world, that's fine. The problem with artificial intelligence is on the creative side. I want to tell you, we published Nora Roberts, right? Nora Roberts has written hundreds of books. They're all pretty much, they're all different, but they all have the same sort of underpinning, right? And so you can tell an artificial intelligence engine to read all of Nora Roberts' books. And you can then say, write me a Nora Roberts book and make it a Western. Make it, make it science fiction. You can say whatever. And you know what? It'll be pretty good. Right now, it'll be kind of lumpy and not good. But within 2 years from now, I don't think you'll be able to tell the difference. Now, on some types of books, you'll be able to tell the difference always. But on a Nora Roberts, on a romance book, they all have the same tropes. They all use it, the author's books generally are repetitive. People who love reading romance go and read those authors because they love their books and they know what they're going to get. In that case, artificial intelligence will give you a really pretty good Nora Roberts novel, right? Who gets paid? And does Nora get any money at all from that? And my contention is Nora needs to get paid, period. Not sure how much, not sure how to calculate it, but Nora needs to get paid. And the third thing that people are going to have to deal with is the expiration of the Google settlement and the legal loss that followed from the Authors Guild and what effect that's going to have on copyright in America. And the problem is there's a lot of complicated issues, particularly with artificial intelligence and copyright. And we have a Congress in the United States that is incapable of dealing with issues like this and legislating. They just don't legislate anymore. So copyright is going to have to be decided in the courts. And that means somebody has got to figure out how and when to sue on the next big shifts in order to figure out a framework for how, for instance, for how authors are going to get paid in a world of artificial intelligence, how authors are going to get paid. And that can only work if parties figure out the right lawsuits, when to bring them, and how to win them. And the authors, unfortunately, after the Google settlement, kept going and lost their lawsuit. So when the Google settlement expires, copyright will change unless there is lots of robust activity. So that's it. That's the canned presentation. Question?
Well, John, thank you. Thank you. This was really interesting. I just love that Google story and the Amazon hotel room story. But and I will invite questions, but while you're kind of scratching your head, let me just start with one. In some ways, you admitted in several times that the industry did not realize what Bezos kind of had already thought through, and Google and that clause in the 300-page contract is kind of just a wonderful example. I had not heard that before. So the question is this industry, which ultimately is kind of probably the oldest media industry there is, is that kind of, in a way, its product is a good, and people write books and people buy books and read books and lend books, but is the management up to the digital revolution? You are a real, in a way, that one of the reasons why people look to you is because you were kind of different. And I like to think that having an MBA probably,
from Columbia.
unusual situation, because usually the publishers, at least maybe that's my image, are kind of people with great literary culture, and they kind of love the ideas and they love the authors, they love the intellectual part of this business.
Yeah, of course.
More than the kind of what you talked about, the pricing and all that stuff. So is that possibly is that changing?
Look, I don't know, right? The most of the big publishers, at least in the United States and the English-speaking world, most of the big publishers are owned by large, sophisticated media conglomerates, right? So there's a lot of talent around who can figure this stuff out. But the problem is the players we deal with now are way ahead of those guys as well. I mean, I'll give you an example. I was sitting with Dan Clancy, who was in charge of the books project. He was the computer engineer in charge of the books project for Google. And he was had formerly been the head of computer engineering for NASA, right? A bona fide rocket scientist. So I go out with them. We spent years and years on the opposite each other at the negotiating table. We became friends. We went out for breakfast one day, and he explained to me in this coffee shop. He said, "Look, at the end of the day, you know, computers are not going to be the computer processing power is not going to be in your computer." And I said, "What the hell are you talking about?" And he said, "Well, it won't be. The processing power will be out sort of in the ether, right? The power will be in servers elsewhere, not in your computer." I said, "Ben, I can't even grasp that. What the hell do you mean?" He said, "Well, it's going to take a while, but we're starting to look at this, and eventually I think we're thinking it's going to be called the cloud, and it's going to be cloud computing." And at that point in time, nobody had any idea. All the history of computers was the computer was a box, and the processing that was done, you were going to do, was in the box that was on your desk, or the supercomputer that was in your university. So at the end of the day, we will never know enough, given who we are, we will never know enough about what is coming. So the answer is, don't rely on what you know. The mistake we made is we didn't realize how dumb we were. And that's always going to be the case on these new things coming over the horizon. So the answer is, hire yourself someone who does know enough about it to help advise you and tell you what's coming over the horizon. And it was a mistake we made. It's pride and hubris. I thought I was a pretty smart guy. And Richard Sarnoff is an incredibly smart guy. He runs the media practice for KKR now. I mean, he's brilliant. But you have to understand what you don't know. And will publishers be set to do it? I have no idea. That depends on, who gets those big jobs and what experience they have, and will they be able to see clearly, and will they be able to recognize their weaknesses? And I don't know about the rest of you, but recognizing my own weaknesses is something I don't spend a shitload of time on. I don't spend a ton of time trying to figure out how dumb I am.
Thank you. I'm going to recognize Ben Compain, and then I want to invite Paulo Faustino from Portugal, who is not only a professor, but he's also a book publisher.
Okay.
Ben, go ahead.
Right. Thanks, Ali. A lot of food for thought and a lot of new stuff to think about, John. One quick comment, though. You got some bad advice over the years. This notion that, which I think was typical of the time, of if you give something away for free, people will never pay for it.
Yeah.
I think that was typical MBA stuff, that
Yep.
something is valuable only, by what people will pay for it. We've learned from Substack and from from the whole, business model online, that you give stuff away for free, you get a big enough audience. In fact, Bezos did that at $9.99, build a big enough audience, and then you just get 10% or 15% to pay, a price. So, I mean, that advice was probably true at one point, but we've learned that there are models where,
Yeah, but I'll disagree with you a bit if you look at the cases over time of how much how much money can be made in a creative business where the price points drop from the creators, it becomes quite difficult. I mean, if you talk to musicians today, there's all kinds of models to make their money for musicians today. But it's pretty hard to be a working musician today and make money from subscription businesses of your new release. It's near impossible. Now you can still do concerts and you sell t-shirts. But in the case we're talking about for publishers, if the perceived value of books is free, author contracts are pretty clear. Publishers are not allowed to put advertising in there. And it's pretty clear that a successful book sells only 10,000 copies. And in today's world, how do you monetize a 10,000 copy audience?
Yeah.
In the old days, publishers write you a $50,000 check for that book. You're not going to make $50,000 with that size audience today. So I agree with you entirely. New models come up, new ways to make money. But the question is, what model is out there that protects the valuable part to society of what was being done?
No, I agree. It doesn't work for everyone. It's just that
I agree, and I agree with you.
And I would have been happy if any of my books sold 10,000. So I never,
yeah, exactly, right.
Never got there.
Mine didn't.
the other comment, you talk about looking over the horizon. Tony Ottinger, the guy I used to work for, created the term which Rumsfeld later used, the unks. You don't know what you don't know. It's the question. We know certain questions to ask, but some people figured it out, like Google, in their whole thing about the non-consumptive use, they knew it wasn't over the horizon for that. I mean, they knew it. You didn't.
Yeah, and perhaps if I had been smart enough to hire an ex-Google high-level programmer to explain to me what all the possible uses of non-consumptive research might be, perhaps I would have had better knowledge. Perhaps if I hadn't, I knew we couldn't see over the horizon, but I couldn't actually imagine what was over the horizon. And that's, we needed to be better at that.
So not to monopolize, maybe you can give a quick answer just to this. This notion of all the books of the world being scanned and digital and being made available through AI, is it would you say that if one was able to use that for research, the way you would go to the library and do research, that would be fair use? It's if you use that to essentially recreate a book in someone's name, that it gets a little complicated about copyright and payment.
No, if you consider how much money in the publishing ecosystem comes from the sale of works to libraries, publishers are getting, you as a scholar can go to the library and look up a book, but the publisher was paid for that book, and so was the author. So having a corpus that anybody can use for free, nobody gets paid, that's not
okay. All right. Thanks, John. Thank you.
Questions, comments? Let me ask.
Your guy from Portugal.
Hello. Okay, thank you, Al. It was a very nice speech. Thank you very much to share with us your perspective about the book industry. Well, a simple question: how do you perceive the self-publishing? I mean, it is a threat for the traditional book publishers, or not, or the brand still will still be very important to make the difference between self-publishing and traditional publishing companies.
Look, I think I am all for self-publishing. I think it's fantastic, right? It's a demo. You take down the barriers to being published. Anybody can publish their book. You don't have to have all these gatekeepers and publishers and retail buyers and all of that. So I think it's fantastic as a model. And publishers are still out there because, as self-publishing grows, there's gonna be tens of millions, if not eventually hundreds of millions of books that people are just publishing themselves. And the publishers, the fact that it went through a publisher and it says, Simon and Schuster on the spine is sort of like the good housekeeping seal of approval, right? There's been a bunch of professionals who've read this and believe in it and are willing to spend money marketing it. Tells you it's going to be of a certain quality level. And what you see happening is self-published books, oftentimes when they become successful, in most cases, they end up getting a traditional publisher to republish them because the money's good and the publisher gives you a lot more reach. So I think as a self-publishing as a thing is great, and I think it continues to exist. And it's sort of like a farm system, in a sports league. It's a way for the people to write their books, get them out there, and then everybody can see which ones work. And Amazon promotes some of them, and the publishers go viral with some of them, and many of them are then published by major publishers. So I think it's a great, a hugely interesting development in the publishing world, and I'm a believer in the value of it.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you. I'm going to recognize Weston who is now in United Arab Emirates, somewhere in the Gulf, right?
Oh yeah, I'm in Dubai right now, so
Dubai.
I would like to say hello to all the fellow colleagues and friends, and to Mr. John Sargent, who have delivered an excellent lecture. I very much enjoyed the entire lecture. It was very specific and very businesslike, because we suffer a lot as academics. There's too much narration going on, but we don't have exact figures that we need most of the time. It seems that you most of the time support the notion of Chris Anderson long tail economics, because it seems that in publishing industry and online world, the long tail is, in terms of distribution, is getting longer and longer. Yeah. And it seems that massively personalized content is also becoming very, very important. But also you mentioned actually many times the issue of content curation and repurposing, and how we repurpose the content, because selling the books may be profitable if you take into consideration not only economies of scale now, but economies of scope. And as you mentioned, the only way actually to create let's say a major success today, even with the greatest authors internationally speaking, is if they actually do content repurposing. So when they make actually a great novel, what they do film. After a film, they do TV series, they do play and Broadway musical, and has become actually sort of a story of American success. So you can't really become successful if you're a great novelist, but you're becoming successful if you're a great novelist. And if they make a film out of your novel, and they make a play, musical, so on and so forth. And I just wonder, would you agree with this notion, or because based on what you have mentioned already in your lecture today?
Hey, John, can I just interrupt? We have 6 more minutes. There are 2 questioners there. What I propose is that they make their points, questions, or just comments, and then you kind of respond.
Okay, well, I can answer that one really quickly, right? The answer is yes. for the very high end, that's the way it now works. But you can still make a lot of money by having a very successful novel that never gets made into a play, that never gets made into a movie, that never gets anything. But for the very high end, for it to really explode and for you to make, you know, tens of millions of dollars, yeah, you have it exactly right.
Marvin Serbu.
I wonder if you could give your thoughts on why ebooks didn't become more than 20% of the market.
Flawed new technology, right? As it turns out, the book is a better technology than the ebook for many, many people. There's an emotional connection to the book that you don't have with, you think about the vinyl record, there was an emotional commitment to, there wasn't an emotional commitment to the digital, any digital version, right? In books, that technology is still pretty good. You can read it outside in the sun glare. You can drop it in the pool. It still works when you pick it out and dry it. You read it with your fingers as well as with your eyes, so you can remember where you are. So I think it's still a good technology, and people still want the bookstore, and they still want that format.
Thank you. And now Hal Vogel.
Yes, quickly, when does the Google agreement expire? What's the termination
Oh,
date?
God, I can't remember. I think I want to say it was either 2025 or 2030, but it's coming up. It's not long.
Okay, thank you. Very close.
Yeah.
John, do you, okay, so let me then raise an issue as kind of as a conclusion before you, is it possible that the problem right now, and that's in a way dealing with Marvin's issue, which is why is it not more, is that the ebook is still kind of in a way a paperless book, but it's still pretty much the same product.
Yeah.
In the same way that the horseless carriage was kind of did not really take off until it became more than just the carriage without the horse in front, and that we are still kind of devoted to this notion of simply just skipping the paper and the print, when in fact the electronics enable us to have products that go far beyond what we now call a book, with pictures and moving pictures and sound effects and individualization and interactivity and all kinds of bells and whistles. Some of them may be fanciful, some of them fall by the wayside, but whether that same product that goes back in a way to Gutenberg, which had a pretty good run, admittedly, but in the same way that ocean clippers and so on had a pretty good run until the airplane came along, they would do something different.
The market has already spoken on this, right? When we did CD-ROM books, when we added movies and we added music and we added visuals, we added all that stuff at huge cost. Nobody wanted it, right? At the end of the day, you want to see what people wanted was to watch movies, to watch video, call it streaming episodes, movies, whatever you want. People want to watch video. People want to listen to music. People like the combination of video and music. But there is something compelling to the written language, telling stories in written language that people want, and they love it. Not everybody, but a huge market wants the experience of uninterrupted by video, by noise, by anything else, the absorption in the brain of the purely written language has value. So when people said, what's the next technology that comes? It's, of course, direct to retina reading or something like that, right? Which the military has some capability of now. So instead of moving your thing over a book, your eyes over a book, actually the words are scanned directly into your retina. And maybe that's the next thing. But I don't think the next thing is going to be a hybrid. I mean, there'll be hybrid products and people will try them again. It's not like that's going to go away. People will try that again. But the last time they tried it, people walked away from it. They weren't interested.
true, but many things have failed. And then eventually they didn't fail.
Yeah, and exactly right. It could be that, another generation from now, 2 generations from now, people don't want to read books anymore. But I got to tell you, all the kids I know still love reading books as books. Even those who only read one book every couple years, still, when they get the right one, love the experience of reading books. And, as you say, the advantage of the Kindle was for older people in many cases to increase the size of the print as we old folks can't, got to have the glasses, and pretty soon it's hard to read the stuff. Audiobooks have increased hugely, right? That's having somebody else read the book for you. That's not really a huge change. It's getting the book through your ears instead of through your eyes. That's what that is. And in some books, it's a better experience, particularly if the author is a very good narrator. It's a different experience, and it allows you to do it while you drive, and it allows you to do it while your hands are busy, and it allows you to do it when you have to look and see other things. So it's a different experience of the book, and I think that'll continue to prosper. But basically, you still have to have the printed word for somebody to read them.
Well, John, you're giving us great hope since most of us here on this Zoom presentation have written books, are writing books, will write.
It's important, man. Keep doing it.
You give us hope. However, there's many also other ways of enhancing this product. For just on the pricing, you can individualize pricing. You can protect the copyright through some blockchain technologies. So one question is, just to not question, really kind of observation, is kind of the R&D that is taking place in the publishing industry, or whether it comes from the outside or whether it comes from the inside of the industry. Now, we are
blockchain for royalties for small components of books. We've been looking at for years, and it has to do with textbooks, right? So can you actually track back the use of 2 paragraphs of your textbook or scholarly book by somebody, figure out how to pay a royalty stream to the author from that usage, and blockchain could enable that. Unfortunately, it's a massive, massive investment, and so far at least, fair use, students have been copying textbooks for years, and two paragraphs of a textbook is considered fair use by most people.
We have now, partly because the speaker was so engaging and the topic so important, run over our allotted time. So I want to thank, first of all, Jason Buckwitz for organizing this, for all of the IMMAA participants for being here and engaging, but in particular to John Sargent. Thank you so much for spending the time with us, and thank you very much for your thoughts. We applaud you for what you did in the past, what you did for us today, and what we will no doubt hear about you in the future.
Okay. Thank you very much. Great to have a conversation.